Hello, everybody. This is Jennifer Matarese, and before I get started with the episode today, I just like to take care of the usual housekeeping. For starters, paid requests are now reopened. If you're interested in submitting a disaster request, please double-check the list of requests I most recently posted to the podcast Facebook and Tumblr accounts to make sure your request has not already been made. Also, please look through past episodes to verify I haven't already covered the disaster in question. To submit a request, you can send a donation of $30 or more to the podcast PayPal at disasterarea@mail.com, on Venmo at Disaster Area Podcast, or on Cash App at Disaster Area Pod. Just add the name of the disaster to the notes on your donation. If you have an idea for an episode subject but you're not sure if it qualifies, feel free to message me and I can approve one way or the other. Although I think by now all of us are aware that my qualifications for what is a disaster are very wide. The subject from this particular episode was chosen by Alyssa, and I'd like to thank them for the request and for the donation. If you'd still like to help support the podcast in another way, you can do so with a one-time donation through PayPal, Venmo, or Cash App, or on a per-episode basis through Patreon at www.patreon.com/disasterareapodcast. A per-episode donation of even as little as $1 an episode can help me do things like pay the rent and keep the lights on. And if you do join the Patreon, you will get new episodes ad-free as soon as I record them, rather than waiting until they are released. So if you become a patron, I would very much appreciate it. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook at Disaster Area Podcast, on Instagram at Disaster Area Pod, and on Tumblr at Disaster Area-Podcast. Also, please think about rating and reviewing the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, wherever else that you might listen to us on. And as always, the sources for each new episode can be found at disasterareapodcast.wordpress.com and in the episode description wherever you might be listening to me. Also, as with other episodes about mass shootings, I will only be using the name of the shooter once. I think possibly twice in this episode, but you understand my rules. So for the rest of the episode, I will be referring to him as the shooter, the perpetrator, the murderer, the kid, etc. The sources for this episode include an episode of the show Very Bad Men, as well as the book Rampage, The Social Roots of School Shootings, the Time article When the Silence Fell, a New York Times article entitled When Grief Wanted a Hero, Truth Didn't Get in the Way, an ABC News article on the shooter's recent parole attempt, and the court report from his 2008 appeal. With all of that taken care of, thank you very much for listening, and welcome to Disaster Area. Episode 246, The Heath High School Shooting, December 1st, 1997. 3 deceased, 5 injured. We as Americans live in a post-Columbine world. I was in school during the 80s and early 90s, and at the time the only drills we did here in northeastern Pennsylvania were for fires, and maybe once or twice for tornadoes just in case. But never once were we ordered to hide in the blind spot in our classrooms, to duck into a closet, to hide under our desks, all while the teacher locked the door and pulled down the window shades. We would hear about mass shootings at other places, Luby's Cafeteria in Texas, the Long Island Railroad, the post office shooting in Edmond, Oklahoma, but schools were just something I don't recall any of us ever even thinking about, except for maybe when we learned what the song I Don't Like Mondays was really about. Columbine happened 4 years after I graduated high school and when my brother was still in middle school. I didn't worry about me, I worried about him. And then I went back to college in 2011 and Sandy Hook happened, and the semester after that we came back to opaque coverings on the classroom windows in the library. I didn't have the nerve to mention that any determined shooter could just fire through the glass and push them out of the way. In any event, these days, kids in schools throughout America get active shooter training because just enough of us have decided we're fine with that. Of course, we've now reached a point where your average school shooter is going to have gone through the same active shooter training as the rest of the students in that school and can prepare accordingly. But my point is that there is a clear dividing line between then and now, and it goes right through Littleton, Colorado. However, it's not as though Columbine was the first school shooting. We've already covered the UT Austin Tower shooting in 1966 on this podcast, and I brought up the shooting which inspired the song I Don't Like Mondays in the previous paragraph. Then there was the song Jeremy by Pearl Jam, the lyrics of which felt a lot different in 1992 than they do if you listen to them as Gen Z now. The 90s featured a sprinkling of school shootings here and there. Nothing on the scale of Columbine, but hints of what was to come. What happened in West Paducah, Kentucky in 1997, a year and a half before Columbine, was just one of those harbingers. Paducah, Kentucky is a town in the northwestern part of the state, just across the Ohio River from Illinois. The population of Paducah at the time of our episode would have been around 27,000 people. Now, West Paducah, the setting of this episode, was somewhat smaller, to say the least. It was I guess you could call it a suburb of Paducah, just to the west, and it is, again, much smaller. Unlike Paducah, West Paducah only had one high school at the time, Heath High, home of the Pirates. You know how every teen movie in the 90s had that sequence where one character tells a new student about all the different cliques? Heath was just like any other high school. The nerds, the jocks, the goths. But it was also a very religious community, and its significant Christian student population would participate in church activities and engage in group prayer whenever they felt they wanted to, or they felt it was necessary. On the morning of December 1st, the first day back after Thanksgiving break, several students gathered in one of the open areas of the school to have a prayer circle. Now, this is in the lobby of the school, which has this big open area. It was plenty of room for, that morning, there would be 35 people who would be participating in this prayer circle. For any of you non-Americans out there who may be wondering, hey, can they do that with separation of church and state? Yes, they totally can. As long as the school is not forcing you to do it or forcing anybody else to do it, it's fine. So a group of Christian students getting together every morning to pray for a good school day, perfectly fine. Just as long as they don't make anybody else do it or they don't try to force anybody, that's okay. The number of people who joined the prayer circle each morning varied. Sometimes it was a lot, sometimes just a handful of students. Student Luke Fallon led the prayer circle that morning, the same as every other. In the lobby, the group of 35 students joined hands. Sophomore twins Missy and Mandy Jenkins, senior Jessica James, basketball player Shelley Schaberg, fellow freshman Holland Holm, softball player Casey Steger, and Nicole Hadley. Months earlier, Nicole had walked side by side at her 8th grade graduation with a nerdy but funny kid that she would hang around with sometimes, named Michael Carneal. That same kid asked Casey Steger out on a date a month or so before December 1st, but Casey shot him down. The group held hands and said their prayer, and then finished it off with an amen. They had just begun to pick up backpacks and books and purses when there was a popping sound in the lobby. These days, the kids would have already run from the first pop. But in 1997, the prayer group kids looked around for the fireworks they were sure were going off nearby. You know, it's the first day back after a holiday, everybody's a little wound up, maybe somebody's playing a prank, that sort of a thing. Then one student after another began to drop. Kelly Alsip took a bullet to the neck. Missy Jenkins felt her entire body go numb, and she just slumped right to the ground. It was like a puppet with the strings cut. Her sister Mandy lowered down to her side to check on her and kind of cover her. Missy said she couldn't feel her stomach, and the way she lay on the ground didn't look right. Then Missy asked who was shooting at them. When Mandy told her, Missy couldn't bring herself to believe it. They knew that kid. They knew him well. As far as they knew, he couldn't hurt a fly. Others dropped as well. Jessica James fell to the ground, as did Nicole Hadley. Casey Steger slumped forward, lying face down on the linoleum floor with the hood of her sweatshirt hiding her face from view. When Kelly Alsip kind of came over and pulled it up and rolled her over, you could see just blood pouring down her neck. While others ran, Luke Fallon turned on the shooter and asked why he was shooting. The kid lowered his pistol to the ground, then told Luke, "Please, just shoot me." Other accounts say the person who approached him and was told to shoot him was a kid named Ben Strong, but we'll get into that in a little bit. The identity of the person who's speaking with the shooter, being Luke Fallon, is in the book Rampage, The Social Roots of School Shootings, and I kind of trust that a lot more because of what I'm going to get into later. Anyway, it was about that time that Principal Bill Bond arrived to find a bloodbath before him. The shooter had fired off 3 shots in a row and then paused and then fired off 7 shots. And at that point, just the gun, just put it down the ground. Bill Bond, the principal, arrives. And at that point, he asks Ben Strong, the person that I mentioned, what's going on. And he tells him, he was shooting, that kind of thing. He says something to the effect of he told him to stop shooting, or he took the gun away, or something along those lines, but something that made Principal Bond not, still be kind of confused. So in any event, he knows that this kid has shot all of these people who are lying on the ground bleeding in front of him. At this point, as teachers and others trained in medical aid and CPR are working on the injured, Principal Bond called the shooter some sort of bad word. He said he called him a name, and I'm sure it's a name I can't say without swearing. So, and then he escorted him to the office. The shooter sat there, cold and empty, a blank slate. The eyewitness accounts are blurry and fuzzy for obvious reasons, but most of the people said that he just looked like he was just out of it, just blank. There's nothing there. There's no response, nothing. 3 girls would die and 5 other kids would be injured when one of their own classmates walked into Heath High School in West Paducah, Kentucky, on December 1st, 1997, and fired upon a prayer circle taking place near the entrance. Jessica James died at the scene, while Casey Steger and Nicole Hadley would later die on that same day in the hospital. Nicole Hadley actually, her father was away on business, and when this happened, they brought her to the hospital and they kept her on life support long enough for him to get there so that he could say goodbye. And then as soon as he was able to do that, they removed the life support and she passed away instantly, pretty much. The very next day, 300 students arrived to join the prayer circle. Obviously, one presumes not in that lobby, but it went from just, a handful of people to the entire community kind of coming together and saying, they're going to pray for that day. On the Friday following the shooting, all 3 girls shared a funeral ceremony as they were laid to rest. At the time, Missy Jenkins was still in the hospital, paralyzed from the waist down. When her family visited, she tried to quiet their tears by assuring them she was alive, and that was what mattered. Missy Jenkins is actually, if you ever see an interview with her or you read things that she's written or talked about this, she is a phenomenal survivor in terms of how she has responded to this and how she's kept her spirits up. And I'm sure she's gone through a lot of stress, and I'm sure there have been bad times, but also she, in the immediate aftermath, was basically like, I'm alive, and that's all that matters. That if I'm paralyzed from the waist down or from the chest down, that's fine. That it's not good, but I'm alive, and as long as I'm alive, I can keep going. She had an incredible attitude. Elsewhere, Shelley Schaberg, another one of the victims, faced the end of her athletic career due to gunshot wounds in her arm. She had, as I understand it, she was a basketball player, and she was looking at, maybe getting a basketball scholarship. She was doing really well, and now that was just over. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, a story emerged that one member of the prayer group, Ben Strong, wrestled away the shooter's gun and persuaded him to stop. Strong had already been warned by the shooter not to show up for the prayer circle that Monday, that something would happen. Strong went anyway, and now everyone thought he was a hero. Strong was interviewed multiple times on the radio, on TV, in magazines and newspapers. He received kudos as the hero of the whole event. There's just one problem. He didn't do either of the things he was supposed to have done. Much like with the case of Cassie Bernal later on at Columbine, the story of Ben Strong's response to the shooting had been confused at best and a lie at worst. Principal Bond was the one to point out Strong as a hero, and the story just wandered off on its own, as stories often do following the grief, stress, and confusion of a mass shooting. Like I said, one of the sources that I used for this episode was an article from Time, and called "When the Silence Fell," and it is written before it became clear that the story about Ben Strong being a hero that day was misconstrued, was incorrect, was a lie, whatever it might have been. And it really, I mean, it reads like something out of a movie. It really does. I mean, I might question it if I was the writer, or the editor or something along those lines. But the thing about Ben Strong, he was the son of a pastor. He was, he was a good kid, popular kid, as I understand it. And I think there was just a lot of confusion about what happened, and Principal Bond made assumptions, and at a certain point you're so far gone that you are, you really can't correct the record without coming off as somebody who might have been doing something profoundly wrong. From what I've seen, Ben Strong seems like, he said basically, yeah, I did not do that, but what was I supposed to do, I guess, in defense of that? It really is something where it's hard to understand how these things happen, how a lie or something that is confusion or something that people believe they saw becomes truth. And that truth, even if it gets fixed later on down the line, for some people it's still the truth, like in the case of Cassie Bernal. For those of you who don't know anything about Columbine, one of these days I may cover it. That'll be one of those episodes that's like 5 episodes long. But Cassie Bernal was a student who had just started at Columbine. I don't think too long before. I think she had just started that year. Didn't have a lot of friends, but she was very religious. She was very into her church. She was, as far as I understand it, a good student. She was a good kid. And she was in the library hiding under a desk. And what happened was that one of the shooters kind of knocked on the top of the desk to startle her, and then looked under, said peekaboo, and then shot her. But what the story was that she was asked if she believed in God, and she said yes, and then she was shot. And that wasn't entirely accurate. That was based on eyewitness accounts or earwitness accounts, specifically Craig Scott, one of the survivors who was in the library and thankfully did not get shot. But he heard somebody say, that they believed in God because that was what they had been taught. They were asked something along those lines, and it was a completely different person. And I think Craig realized that later. Craig, unfortunately, his sister Rachel was the first one who passed away in Columbine. But this is the thing with these scenarios, these mass shootings and things along this nature, is that what happens can be very confusing and very stressful, and nobody knows what's going on. And so things like videotapes and audio tapes and all of that, audio recordings, anything that you could have that's actually solid evidence is a lot better to have than what people hear and see, because inevitably what is going on is just too much to completely see in a clear and unblemished and unbiased light. So let's just get past that. The shooter was Michael Carneal, the same kid who walked with Nicole Hadley at their junior high graduation, the same guy Casey Steger turned down for a date back around Halloween. He actually, like I said, he knew Nicole Hadley really well. She would come over to his house sometimes to hang around, along with a lot of the other neighborhood kids. That was that kind of house where, you know, all the neighborhood kids came. She had witnessed to him on occasion, in regards to Christianity, and I guess trying to get him more interested in church. And so these were people that he knew. They weren't people that he had a grudge against, though, as far as the investigation could tell. He just knew them because it was that kind of a high school where you knew everybody, kind of. His father was a workman's comp lawyer, and his mom stayed at home. They were very active parents, working concession booths and attending band performances all the time. The day of the shooting, they would rush to the school with piles of blankets, hoping to help, only to be escorted to a quiet place where they were told what their son had done. The shooter was one of two kids, the younger brother to a more popular older sister who would go on to be valedictorian. I did not have an older sibling, but my brother had me, and so I don't know exactly what it must have been like to show up 8 years after me and have people be like, oh, I had your sister. She read books all the time. What do you do? And it's not read books all the time. So he would later state about his time in school, the shooter, would later say that, quote, there was a pecking order and I was probably towards the bottom of it. The kid arguably had undiagnosed depression from an early age. His memories of being in elementary school were colored with fear and loneliness and rage. He thought about doing strange things, like getting everybody out of the school and then being able to talk on the intercom all he wanted, which, I mean, it's strange, but it's not, like, dangerous. And it's not that weird. Little kids have thoughts like that all the time. But as he got older, eventually those strange thoughts went in darker directions. He hid kitchen knives in his bedroom and wrapped himself in multiple towels after using the shower because he was certain he was being watched. He did a lot of really kind of weird, strange things, just in regards to feeling as though he was being watched or there was a conspiracy against him or something along those lines. He was just very troubled. In school, he'd had a few problems already. He decided to check out the Playboy website on a school computer, which for those of us who were using computers around the same time in 1997 must sound like the most futile effort in being bad, considering how long it would have taken for the pictures to load. He also used a pointy object to dig at a school wall, presumably in an effort to make himself look like a bad boy type. He had a tendency to do that as he grew older, particularly when he moved into Heath High from junior high school. He'd buy things sometimes and then go to school and tell people he stole them to try and look cool. The thing was that he was hanging out with the goths, and his ideas about what they would find cool were he would bring in money that he took from his dad and just kind of hand it out. And he would, he'd say he stole stuff. Like he was just trying to get these goths to think that he was cool. And of course, these are like seniors and they're looking at this kind of nerdy looking freshman and thinking, no, you got to work up to this, dude. You can't just walk right up and we all think you're cool. You're a freshman and we're seniors and juniors and you're on the bottom rung of the popularity ladder right now. So, and like I said, the kid was just that. He was a kid, scrawny with messy curls and glasses. The kid looked at least a couple of years younger than 14. He would never be the most popular kid in school, but he had a reputation for telling jokes and having a good sense of humor. Missy and Mandy Jenkins knew him well. Was, after all, not the biggest school district, so you tend to spend the years from kindergarten to senior year with the same group of kids. I had almost exactly the same 60 kids who were in kindergarten with me as graduated with me. So knew everybody that I went to high school with very well. The shooter did all sorts of silly things to get a laugh out of people, like tucking a Twister playing sheet from his into his shirt like a cape and running through the halls. When you don't have popularity or athletics to fall back on, sometimes humor is the only way you can get through school. Now, he's doing all these things in middle school to to make friends and be silly and just kind of get attention. That's what he was doing. Right before the end of his time in middle school, however, the kid's tenuous grasp on anything resembling popularity took a killer blow. For some reason that probably wouldn't fly now, or almost definitely wouldn't fly now, the Heath Middle School newspaper had a section entitled Rumor Has It, which printed rumors about the students, with or without evidence to back them up. That particular issue claimed the shooter was gay. First off, outing anyone without their permission is both cruel and gross. But the kid wasn't gay. And in the 90s, that sort of accusation could lead to all kinds of bullying and mistreatment. I mean, it can now, but in the 90s, even worse. When I was a high schooler at a small town school in the early 90s, the understanding was that if you were gay, you wouldn't dare come out in town. You would wait until you left town to go to college and then come out. Coming out in my town would have ended in a serious beatdown, and my hometown wasn't half as conservative as West Paducah. The kid didn't have the best reaction to the rumor, to say the very least. Gone was the jokester, and in his place was a kid who started trying out bullying. It wasn't the only thing he was trying out. One day, just before Thanksgiving break that year, the kid told a friend he wanted to show him something that he had brought to school in his backpack. It was a handgun he'd found in the closet where his dad kept his guns. His friend wasn't having it, essentially telling him, "Dude, having this here is a bad idea. Take it home and put it back before you get in trouble." Thanksgiving Day was just like anyone else's for the shooter, one imagines. Family, good food, football on TV. But after dinner, the shooter decided to go for a bike ride around the neighborhood. Just telling his family, "I'm just going to go for a bike ride." Just makes it seem completely innocent. It wasn't just a casual ride, though. He had a purpose and a destination in mind. Soon he stopped at the home of a friend of his, Jared Parker. The Parkers weren't home. They were off having Thanksgiving dinner somewhere else at another relative's home. It was the perfect time for a break-in. The shooter got into the Parkers' garage through an unlocked window. He knew where they stored their guns, and he knew where they hid the key that unlocked the gun safe. Now it was time for a little one-stop shopping. The kid opened their gun case and started tossing everything into a duffel bag. 4 .22 rifles, 1 .30-30, plenty of ammo, and even the earplugs. When he got back home, he left the bag outside by his bedroom window and strolled in as though he hadn't a care in the world. Back in his room, he pulled the bag in through his window and then stuffed it under his bag. As if in a display of just how young he was, he shielded the bag from prying eyes with boxes of Legos. Sometime over the weekend, the shooter took the bag over to another friend's house. He wanted to show off his stash to Craig Holt, and also Craig's older brother, Danny. Instead of telling him to leave or get rid of the guns, the Holt boys joined him in target practice on a pink rubber ball they found. Now, at one point before he left, Danny, who was a senior, told the others he was like, "Look, dude, don't get into trouble with those guns. Don't keep those guns or do something with them because you don't want to get in trouble with that. That is not good. Having them is probably not a good idea either. Like, you need to get rid of those guns." On Sunday, after Thanksgiving, the shooter took 2 more shotguns that belonged to his father and added them to his arsenal. It didn't matter that he was only one person, that he could only fire one weapon at a time. That one weapon would do just fine for what he was planning to do. The shooter wanted to look impressive, after all. He later got interviewed and said something along the lines of, 1 gun is good, but 5 guns is great. And it's just like, yeah, but you're one person. You could have 5 guns, but it doesn't change the fact that, you've only got so much ammo. It's better to have more ammo than more guns. It's just, the way he talks about this is just, it makes you understand that he was a kid, not understanding that this wasn't, this wasn't a play. It wasn't something fun. It wasn't something without consequence. It was something very, very serious. And it was something where people would die. On the morning of the attack, the shooter needed to get his arsenal down the stairs without raising suspicion. So he wrapped them all in blankets and duct taped the roll together. Then he put his bedding on top and told his mom when he came downstairs that the cat puked on the bed and his sheets needed washing. He dropped those off in the laundry room and then went outside and put his bundle of weapons in the trunk of his sister's car. The shooter got a ride to school with his older sister. She mentions at the time that Butterfly from Mariah Carey was playing on the radio. And for those of you who haven't heard the song, it's not exactly the sort of thing you'd listen to pump yourself up prior to a school shooting. I'm just trying to imagine like the two boys from Columbine who were driving there that morning, like listening to Mariah Carey, and it just doesn't work. So it's just one more thing that is so incredibly strange about this whole thing is this kid sitting here listening to Butterfly while there's 4 or 5 weapons in the trunk. When the two of them got to school, the shooter got his wrapped bundle out of the car before he followed his sister to the music room. And they were both in band. His sister was one of the best members of band, and he was not, basically. Story of his life, from what I understand. Making friendly conversation, music teacher Mr. Sams asked the kid what the package was. "It's just my English project," he said. It's something he told several people, although the class it was for changed depending on the person. It was an English project. It was an art project. It was a history project. It was a science project. He just told everybody what they wanted, what he thought they wanted to hear, or something that he thought would pass. And the thing was, obviously it doesn't look like a project. It looks like a bedroll, but that's what he's got. The shooter then left and headed for the main lobby of the school, where the prayer circle took place each morning. His group of friends, Heath's ragtag band of goth kids, asked what the bundle was. Before he could give an answer, he dropped it on the floor, and one friend said, "Sounds like guns to me." The subject changed quickly enough, however. The shooter was still a freshman after all, a skinny dweeb who wouldn't intimidate a mouse. He's not popular. He's, kind of one of the peripheral friends that you would have in your friends group in high school. Maybe you were the peripheral friend. I always kind of felt like the peripheral friend. I think I was on like a second or third tier. But that's the kind of thing that he was dealing with in that moment was that, he's here with the people that he's trying to be friends with. And they're not telling him to leave. They're not paying attention to him. And they probably should be. With no one paying attention to him anymore, the kid removed a pair of earplugs from his backpack and put them in his ears. Then he got out a Ruger MK2 .22 caliber pistol and a spare clip. That's when he turned on the prayer group standing not far away. He fired first 3 times, then 7 more. He held the pistol with both hands, arms extended, and swung around to spread the gunfire. The shooter's sister stood not that far away from when the shooting started. It took her a moment to realize it wasn't fireworks, and then another moment to realize that the boy holding the gun was her own brother. She took a few steps toward him, ready to stop him, but then he looked directly at her with that blank expression, which startled her. She realized he didn't recognize her at all in that moment. He was just out of it. So, like so many others in the lobby, she bolted for safety. I had this terrible thought when I was reading that particular section of Rampage where, if my brother had ever been in a situation like that and I was the one who was seeing him like that, what would I do? Would I do what this person's sister did and make a run for it? Or would I say, to hell with it, and throw myself at him? And I would like to think that even if it was like this, I would throw myself at him. But you don't know what you're going to do until you're in that moment. And so, it's very, very difficult. And God knows I never would think in a million years that my brother would do something like that. So thankfully, I don't have to think about that. One thing which was later found in the shooter's locker was a copy of the book Rage by Stephen King. So here's the thing about Rage. Rage is a story King wrote under his pen name, Richard Bachman, in 1997. I believe it was published about 1 month before I was born. So the original cover for the short story shows a young man sitting on a teacher's desk with his elbow resting on his knee as he stares at the reader. On the floor lies a woman in a dress and heels with blood nearby. There are 2 books on the desk, but no gun, which there probably should be. Understandably, Rage is no longer in print by Stephen King's choice for good reason. Also, understandably, I have a PDF of the novel as well as the audiobook somewhere in my apartment. A quick check on eBay shows that unless you want a copy in French, getting a paperback of Rage is going to run you thousands of dollars. Considering the book came out in 1977, 2 years before Brenda Spencer would say, "I don't like Mondays," after firing on the elementary school across the street from her home and killing 2 people, the storyline is either terribly prescient or a guideline for future shooters, depending on how you feel about it and what a shooter who reads it might get out of it. Inspiration or support. The story centers around a student named Charlie, who's suspended for attacking a teacher. After a meeting with the principal in which he's expelled, Charlie retrieves a gun and returns to his classroom. He retrieves a gun from his locker, takes the gun out of the locker, sets what's left in the locker on fire, closes the locker door, and then goes back to his classroom. He murders 2 teachers and takes the students hostage, but unlike what we might expect given the last 25 years of experience, he doesn't kill the students. He instead uses the opportunity to manipulate the teachers, administration, and law enforcement officers who respond. Including the shooter at Heath High School, 6 school shootings in the 80s and 90s were committed by perpetrators who either read Rage or at the very least had it in their possession. Stephen King had the book removed from circulation following the events at Heath High School, so now any high school shooter who might want to gain inspiration from the book is going to have to dig up $4,000 to dig for it on eBay, or they're going to have to get a PDF like I did. And why spend that much money when you can be inspired by other real school shooters for free? The thing about Rage, and I've read it before, so it's not like this is, a new realization, but the thing about Rage, if you have never read Rage, is that knowing what we know now about mass shootings and school shootings and that sort of thing, Rage is incredibly unrealistic. The main character shoots these 2 teachers and then doesn't shoot any of the students. And the students are like laughing and making jokes and telling him like treating the whole thing as a joke. And I haven't finished rereading it yet, but it just the parts that I've been rereading are just reminding me that like the book reads like early Stephen King, which is what which if you've ever read Stephen King books, I've read a lot of early Stephen King. It is just, it is just so unrealistic. Like not even for it to be horrific, it would need to be more realistic, and it's just not. The way that the teenagers behave is just very strange. Like one girl's like, "Oh, you're not going to shoot us? Can I have a cigarette?" Like it's so distant from the way that school shootings actually happen and how people who are involved in them actually are. It's probably the worst thing that Stephen King's ever written in terms of the subject matter, but also in terms of like the actual behavior of the characters themselves. I think the only worst thing that he's ever written is the a certain scene in It, which, for those of you who've read It, you know exactly which scene I'm talking about. The scene that will never make it into any movie adaptation. That one. Anyway, the shooter at Heath High School would be charged with 3 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, and burglary for stealing the weapons he intended to use in the shooting. While he was found to have multiple mental health issues, depression, anxiety, schizotypal affective disorder, the shooter accepted a plea deal that would let him serve life in prison with the possibility of parole in 25 years. He pled guilty by reason of insanity. That was how he was able to avoid the death penalty. Later, the families of his victims would sue the shooter, and they actually sued the shooter, the school, like some entertainment things, and they ended up dropping everybody but the shooter from that lawsuit. He would lose to the tune of $42 million. Understandably, that money was never going to be paid by the young man sent to prison for life. That's just the way it is when there's those lawsuits. Sometimes they just make it so that if you ever make any money whatsoever, it's going to end up going to your victims and their families. In 2022, 25 years after the attack, the shooter finally came up for parole. By now, he'd been officially diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic. He'd been treated for those mental health issues while in prison, and he shared with the parole board that he feels a level of guilt for possibly inspiring other school shooters over the years. Still, despite his remorse and continued treatment, the parole board voted 7-0 to deny the shooters one chance at parole. He will now spend the rest of his life behind bars and was being housed as of 2 years ago when this was held at the Kentucky State Reformatory. I am not saying, and I don't want anybody to get the impression that I'm implying, that he should be released. I think he needs to spend the rest of his life behind bars. It's a matter of safety, and that's what a lot of the victims said. I know Missy Jenkins stood before the court and said, the parole board, and said he should not be allowed out. Several others said as well. I think the Holland Holm, who was the freshman who was shot and injured, one of the ones who was injured, he did say, I think it's not right to punish someone who is mentally ill and who was a child at the time for something like this. I think he's been punished enough, and that didn't change the decision of the parole board. They stuck with their decision for him to stay in jail for the rest of his life. Heath High School closed in 2013 when it and 2 other high school districts were absorbed into the McCracken County high school system. However, if you look up satellite photos of the school on Apple Maps, the building's still there, and so too does a memorial to those lost in the shooting across Metropolis Lake Road from the school building. Amongst a copse of trees is a circle of brick surrounding a stone monument on which the names Casey Steger, Jessica James, and Nicole Hadley are engraved. As far as I understand it, also, Missy Jenkins has gotten married and has kids, which is great. Everybody, as far as I understand it, seems to be doing really well in Heath. I didn't see anything where there was any sort of question about, any, bad responses from those who went through what they went through. Obviously, this is a very stressful situation, and this is the sort of thing that you really need to go to therapy for. You need to speak with somebody who, a professional who can help you get through this, and hopefully they did get that chance. It's so strange, though, to imagine being someone who was in a school shooting prior to Columbine. Columbine, like I said, it's like the cutoff. It's like this shooting that a lot of people, I think a lot of people don't think that there were school shootings before Columbine. Like, this was something that the 2 shooters from Columbine just dreamed up one day, and that everybody else was like, hey, that's a great idea, and started doing what they did, or at least attempting to do what they were attempting to do, which... It's one of the things about Columbine that always bothers me. So many people who have gone on to commit school shootings have used or have cited the Columbine shooters as being inspirational to what they did. And it is frustrating because, at least to me, because I don't understand why you would decide to use as inspiration two people who completely failed at the plan that they set out. Everything they wanted to do went absolutely wrong. They were losers, not just in terms of what they ended up doing, but in terms of what they wanted to do and what they completely failed at. There was so much they had planned to do, like blow up the cafeteria and do all this stuff and shoot people on the way out, and they were gonna, go here and do this and as as much as they were able to take the lives of 13 people, which is horrific all in its own, they more than likely considered that a failure. And I think that they would only not consider it a failure, knowing that so many other shooters have said that they are inspired by them, which is just... It just is so frustrating that that's what you're going for? Really? Those two? And I know that that might come off as a little flippant, but I think it's just frustration on my part because I've researched so many mass shootings and I've read so many books and so many, articles and all kinds of different things about mass shootings and school shootings and all of that. And Columbine is, when you look back on it, it's such a mess. There's so much in regards to Columbine that goes back to what we see with Heath High School and Ben Strong, the story of Ben Strong, where he is presented as this hero when he really didn't do what it was claimed that he did. That doesn't make him a bad person. It doesn't make him a bad person that he wasn't able to wrestle the gun away, or that he didn't stand up and why are you shooting and stop shooting and all this. That doesn't make him a bad person. But it boils down to a kid not being able to correct something that they probably should. Because, Ben Strong's just a kid just like all of these people involved in this are kids. And so the same kind of thing happened at Columbine, where you had people who were like, oh, they were goths. They weren't goths. Oh, they were gay. They weren't gay. Oh, they were in the trenchcoat mafia. That was an entirely different group of kids, and they weren't in that group. They just wore trench coats. Like, everybody wore trench coats. Every guy in the 90s, like towards the 90s, a lot of guys wore those black trench coats. If it wasn't because of Highlander, it was because of some other TV show that they had watched where a really cool guy wears a trench coat. I had a boyfriend back then, my high school boyfriend, who in the early 90s was wearing those coats because he was like 6 feet tall or whatever, and it looked really good on him. So I mean, like, the trench coat thing was something that just made me, I think, it just made me roll my eyes when I would see it in news reports, like, oh, they were part of the trench coat mafia. And I'm like, no, teenage boys just wear trench coats. It's just the way it is. Black trench coats. I don't know how to explain it to you. It's just, the fact that you can hide a weapon in there, that's just a bonus for a guy like that. But no, it's not a thing. And one of these days, if I ever do get to cover Columbine, I am going to have a whole episode that is just everything that is absolute garbage about that was believed about Columbine but wasn't true. And it turned out later they found out it wasn't true. It's just, there was so much confusion and so much so much chaos. People don't know what's going on in a situation like that. Their eyewitness testimony is not good. It is not good at all. And that is something to keep in mind. Eyewitness testimony is always going to be questionable because people are not perfect. And people, I don't want to say they see what they want to see, but you see different things from different angles. And I always think of that cartoon where it is a news camera that is one of the standing ones that would be in like a news, pointing at the news anchor's desk at the nightly news. One of the ones that's standing up like that, and you see a man chasing another man, and the way that it is framed in the camera, it looks like the man who is innocent in this is holding up a knife toward the other man because of the way that it's framed. And the coverage of Columbine was a lot like that. There's an entire chapter in the book Columbine by Dave Cullen, which is about how people were, these students are sharing rumors as they're standing outside the school, as they're trying to figure out what's going on. They're talking about, well, who could have done this? Who would have done this? Is it those two kids? I don't believe it's those two kids. Maybe it's another kid. Maybe it was like 4 kids, 5 kids. We don't know what's going on. I can just imagine a bunch of kids standing around, and of course it's just like if any other group, you start gossiping and you start sharing information, and a lot of times that information is just stuff that you're thinking on the fly. And so these kids were being asked things by news reporters. They were being prompted, not intentionally, but if a news reporter comes up to you while you're very upset because you just ran out of a school in which there's a school shooting going on and says, "We've heard that that there were 3 shooters. Is that true?" You may go, "I only saw 2, but there could have been more." Like, you may suddenly decide to wrap your brain around that, or the rumors of them being gay. It could have been, one person says, oh, they were nerds, they were bullied. And then it goes on to, well, what were they being bullied for? Oh, they were being bullied because they were gay. Like, it's the 90s. This is what we're doing back then. Don't ask me. I don't understand either. Oh, God. I will never ever understand people who are like, I would love to go back to high school. No, I never want to go back to high school. Never. I don't even want to look at my high school. It's up the street and I never want to look at it again. But yeah, this is one of those situations where it's just, it is so interesting that you have someone who genuinely needed help. And he even says, he says, I think if somebody had walked up to me at one point, when the interview that he did a few years ago, he said, I think if somebody had walked up to me and said, hey, is everything okay? I don't think I would have done it. Now, is that true? Who knows? But I think that the world wouldn't be hurt if more of us weren't willing to walk up to people who seem like they might need help. And we said, hey, do you need some help? Are you okay? Is everything all right? Do you need a hug? Do you need money? Do you need a ride? Do you need a job? Do you need, what do you need? What do you need? Do you need assistance? I'm here to help. Whatever you need, I'll see what I can do. Like, we need more of that in the world anyway. And it might be the thing that helps with asking a kid like this, hey, do you need help? Do you want to speak to somebody? Maybe a counselor or something along those lines, a therapist? Do you need to talk it out? Do you need to let out some of the frustration and anger you've been feeling since you read that rumor in the school newspaper. Like, there are so many things that may have been able to stop this particular shooter from doing what he did. And I don't think it's a good thing to be placing blame on anybody for not asking. But also, I think that just people in general, I think we need to be asking more often of ourselves, of each other, are you okay? Are you all right? Just 3 simple words. Are you okay? That's it. Just, are you okay? You know, and just be prepared for the fact that somebody might go, no, I'm not. Everything is terrible and my life is awful. Like, you have to be prepared for the fact that if you say, are you okay? No, actually, I'm not. Everything sucks. Everything sucks and I want money. I need 5 minutes to myself and I just don't want to do anything. And I hate my job and I hate my life and I hate everything. And you know, I think I vented to somebody the other day, just kind of jokingly. I said, I'm going to be 47 and I'm single and I live alone with a dog and I work 2 jobs and I do a podcast and I still somehow never have any money. And I'm stressed and I have insomnia and everything is awful. And it was more of a joke because I wasn't crying, I think. I think that was the part where I wasn't crying. No, because it's my birthday and my birthday tends to turn me into a 5-year-old. So regardless of whether or not it's a good birthday or a bad birthday, I'm just like, yay, it's my birthday. And even if I don't get anything, I'm just like, whatever, it's my birthday. I'm a big girl. And so, you know, I'm 47 saying, yay, I'm a big girl. I am a big girl. That's true. And the great thing about being a big girl when you're 47 is that you can get in a car and go somewhere and go do something. And theoretically, if you have money, you can go do something really fun. Alas, I could not this year. But I was going to go on vacation this week, and as time went on, I just couldn't afford it. So unfortunately, I am not on vacation this week. Maybe next year. I want to go to New York and stay in the Library Hotel for a week and just not do anything at all, even a little bit. It's gonna be great. I'm gonna stay in the Library Hotel and I'm gonna go to the Strand and I'm gonna go to the New York City Public Library and I'm gonna go to all the places the books live. I'm going to go to as many bookstores as possible. That's going to be my job for the week. I'm going to bring like $1,000 and I'm just going to buy books. Just that's it. I don't know how I'm going to get them home, but I'm doing it. Right now, however, I am at home. I am all alone. Professor is at dog camp for the first time in a month. He is miserable because it's been cold and felt like fall, so every picture of him looks like he's going to kill me when he gets home. But so I just it's my birthday this past week. It was my birthday on the 29th, so I'm still floating on that. I have that like it's my birthday month thing going on, and unfortunately it still seems to be continuing even though it's the 30th. So everything is strange and weird, and I can't explain it. But anyway, thank you guys so much for listening. Until next time, stay safe.